Good evening and welcome to Go Play Pause, the event we had to take online because these days you can only have 1d10 murder hobos in the room at a time. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet tonight. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm delighted you could join us tonight. I'm your host, John Reid, one of the organisers of Go Play, a mini-con in Brisbane, Australia that in non-2020 years offers 2 days of role-playing games, board games and LARPs. For all the latest news about Go Play and events like this one, join our mailing list at goplaybrisbane.com.au. Go Play Pause is our opportunity to share knowledge and inspire you to play your best. Our session tonight is all about game systems, how to use, modify and design them for a better game. My first experience of role-playing was the 1983 basic D&D red box. It had a cool Larry Elmore painting on the cover and 2 rule books and some weird, ugly orange dice that you had to use a blue crayon to fill in the numbers so you could see what you'd rolled. And I loved them. There was a magic to them. These dice that helped us determine whether our imaginary character succeeded or failed. There was a sense that I was stepping into a higher level of game and imagination, that this was a more sophisticated kind of make-believe, because they had ways to codify the abilities and weaknesses of our characters and the opposition they struggled against. Those ugly orange dice started something that has enriched my life and brought so much joy to me and the people I've gamed with over the years. In the decades since then, I've played with so many game systems that range from one-page micro games through to 600-page monsters like the Hero system. Each one has their own way to codify how to play make-believe with a group of friends, and each one has their own individual game system. So to help us improve how we use, modify and design systems, we've put together a panel of talented system masters this evening. First off, we have the judicious Jack. Jack Ford Morgan is co-director and award-winning lead developer for tabletop game company Half Monster Games. Jack has been developing role-playing, board, card, tabletop and mega games for over 5 years. He also researches the design and efficacy of tabletop games for science awareness at the Australian Research Council Centre for Excellence for Mathematical and Statistical Frontiers at the Queensland University of Technology. His latest card game, Trust Me, I'm a Superhero, has just concluded a successful Kickstarter. So Jack, what's the first RPG system that captured your imagination and why?
Well, the first one that I ever played was standard old D&D, actually. Yeah, we used to play after school at one of my friends' places, and like 15 people would turn up and try and like hack the system to, you know, have a whole boatload of people fighting krakens and stuff like that. And that's where it started. And having those unusual sort of player numbers actually made me really interested in other game systems and how you can adapt them and build them to for various different needs.
Awesome. And next, I will introduce the valorous V. V. Hendro is an award-winning indie games designer and is co-founder of Storybrewers Roleplaying. To date, she's published Good Society, a Jane Austen RPG, Alas for the Awful Sea, and the upcoming Little Box RPGs. Good Society has picked up local awards in Australia as the ARPIA Game of the Year in 2019 and internationally in the 2019 IGDN Groundbreaker Award for Best Rules. V is also a freelance graphic designer specializing in RPG and board game projects, most recently working with Darrington Press and Critical Role on Ukatoa. So tell me, V, what's the first RPG system that captured your imagination and why?
My one, I brought a little show and tell, was Fiasco. This is the this year boxed edition, but the one I played was in on a little book. And I think that was because this was the first game that I played that was a collaborative storytelling experience. And it was very fun. And I'd played some traditionally minded D&D, mouse guardy, stat-based simulation systems, and I liked those. But I had at the time been playing a lot of board games and video games that already scratched a lot of that itch of like building stat-based character builds or like even MMORPGs in terms of the social interactions. So having a game like Fiasco that really made characters, plot, and drama, like the meat of its system, mechanics, was really, really interesting to me. And I love that it gave me a whole new way of accessing RPGs from that angle.
Thanks, V. And our final guest tonight is the noble Nathan. Nathan Russell is a game designer, dad, teacher, and pub wrangler based in Newcastle, Australia. He's been playing, tweaking, and writing RPGs for as long as he can remember. And in 2005, he began publishing games for others to enjoy under the name of Peril Planet, including Freeform Universal and Neon City Overdrive. In 2010, Nathan began National Game Design Month, or Nagademon for short, to encourage others to get their game designs finished and to foster a friendly, supportive community of like-minded makers. When not at his keyboard, you can usually find Nathan watering his garden and lamenting the state of his lawn. So Nathan, what's the first RPG system that captured your imagination and why?
Well, I think that like most people, I started with our classic D&D and those fantasy sorts of games, but the game that really captured my imagination and made me realise that I could do different stuff was Vampire the Masquerade. I think in the early 90s when that came out, and it presented an opportunity to play characters that were morally ambiguous and struggling with their sense of identity, and and wrapped up in an incredibly slick package, with that amazing Tim Bradstreet art and even the way the game and the rules were written and the language it used was completely different, and sort of opened my eyes to the fact that role-playing can be more than a team of would-be dungeon raiders or even monster hunters and investigators, as in Call of Cthulhu. You could be something else. You could play these characters that had a deeper identity, and that really sort of made me realise that you could do a lot more with role-playing games.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nathan. Okay, so tonight we'll start with our panelists talking about different ideas for using, modifying, and designing systems. After that, we'll answer your questions. Just type them into the chat window when you think of them, and we'll try and get them answered for you. So with no further ado, let's ask the first question of the night. So, Jack, what makes a good system for RPGs?
For me, I think a good system is in sort of flexibility, and it allows you to tackle a lot of different problems in a lot of different ways. So there's a lot of systems that really focus in on combat, which is totally fine. But yeah, I like ones where it's sort of, you can apply the same mechanics to a lot of different scenarios, I think.
Yeah. And so V, what for you makes a really good system for RPGs?
So the way I like to assess systems or think about them is by considering the degree to which a system achieves the design goal that it sets out to do. So I don't inherently think of mechanics or collections of mechanics being a system as inherently good or bad. I think of them as well, how much does it go towards building the game experience that you want, so that expresses the core game concepts that you want this game to be. So yeah, I mean, I think a good example, there's a few examples that I'm thinking of, I don't know if anyone's played Starcrossed. It's a game about forbidden love that is based on an earlier system with Dread with the Jenga blocks, but that's a really good way of using a mechanic to really hone in on something. Or Reid's Bride, which is this horror game, which is beautiful, but it also it's a PBTA game, but it really radically changes the moves in a PBTA game. Usually makes you able to do stuff. And in Bluebeard's Bride, which is this feminine horror game, it's more about what you can't do, what the powerlessness that you feel in the face of these terrible things that are happening to you. And so that makes it really feel like a horror game. So yeah, so that's how I think of systems.
What's the PBTA game?
Powered by the Apocalypse is the system. Okay, so the Apocalypse, I have a copy of it floating around somewhere, but it's the system that runs on it, and a lot of games have.
Oh, sure, okay. Yeah, sweet.
And Nathan, what do you think makes a good system for RPGs?
Yeah, I have to agree. I think it's a game that does what it says on the tin. It's a game that achieves what it sets out to do, and allows you to get the the sense or the feeling or tell the stories that you're interested in telling, then it's successful. And whether that's an appropriate, whether it's a particular tone or a particular kind of story or that sort of thing, I think that's when you've got the right system for the right game, for the right sorts of games or stories you want to tell. I have a preference for fairly rules light and short games because I tend to be the one that's probably going to run it or read it all and that sort of thing. And so, I don't want to read 600 pages and be the only one at the table that has, or that sort of thing. And there are, as V said, lots and lots of examples of games that do exactly what they set out to do. I thought one good example is Cthulhu Dark by Graham Walmsley. So the original rules are just 2 pages, although it's now, he did a Kickstarter a few years ago. And it's a really neat little game. It has a dice mechanic that sort of ratchets up the tension, and your heroes are doomed, and that tension is increased every time you're forced to roll against your insight. And so it's a little package with a great sense of this spiraling doom for your characters. And I think that's a good example of a game that does what it sets out to achieve.
Is that sort of an argument for sometimes a game that does one specific thing can sometimes be more successful than something that sets out to be a universal game? Because you've done both, Nathan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they have, there's advantages to both and pitfalls to both, I think. Yep. And sort of, I think a game that sets out to do one thing well is a beautiful thing to play and a beautiful thing to just read sometimes. So absolutely. And then I think, a universal system is a double-edged sword. I think that has its pros and cons depending on the sorts of game, because even a universal system isn't universal. It's set up to play a particular style of game, particular type of game, and it's universal for that type of game, I think, in the end.
So, Jack, when and why do you recommend modifying an existing system?
Oh, whenever you want to, essentially. I think, a lot of systems are sort of built so that you can adapt them to different scenarios, I guess. Obviously, if you have a universal system, it's going to be more easily able to do that. But I'm an advocate of, if you like a particular system from one game and then a particular system from another game, you just can sort of use them together. So I remember I used to play a D&D game where we wanted there to be a bit more of like a social kind of complexity to it rather than just rolling persuasion or something like that. So we grabbed this dice mechanic from a game called Dogs in the Vineyard, which is all about like wandering around the desert and solving problems like cowboys and stuff like that. So and then just sort of hacked together a way that all of your D&D stats could influence your like social stats in a more complex way. So yeah, like I think just all the time. And the other thing is you can always just look up on the internet if someone has also put something together you can draw inspiration from.
Nice. What about you, V? Because alas, for the awful sea is a hack of the apocalypse world. So when and why do you recommend getting in and modifying an existing system?
I think, I mean, I agree with Jack when you want to, when you like love a system, when you're really intrigued by a system. I think that's kind of the reason that we did it. It makes you learn about the system if you actually make something from it in a way that you don't just get by reading it and playing it. So I think it's a really, really wonderful way of getting to understand the central concepts. And the other time we use it a lot is early in a game design as sort of like, it's a good placeholder because you can modify and then you can jettison the things that you do not serve your game and build new systems, but then it helps you not have to start completely from scratch. So sometimes that is a helpful hack of starting out.
Yeah, a good place to start.
Yeah.
And so Nathan, what about you? What what brings on that moment where you decide you want to modify an existing system?
Yeah, I think just as Jack and V said, it's totally when I think often it's when those games spark something of interest in you. You've played it, or you've read it, or you've seen what other people have been doing with it, and you have this desire, this sense of excitement to play around with it and do something with it. I think that the other times that you might do it is, as V said, as a placeholder, where you might see some synergy or connection between the thing that you want to create and this other game that you're already aware of. And so, that's a great place to start, so that you can then build your something new, your contribution to whatever that base is. So I think that's a good place to start. And there's so much out there that you can use and take as a good place to start. There is so much available in Creative Commons or under the OGL and that sort of thing for you to, use and play around with and explore. So yeah.
Well, what's a good remix?
Yeah,
it's a good remix.
There's a lot of game systems that actually come out of people trying to fix problems in other ones, and then just building on top of that because it ends up working better. I can't think of any specific examples, but yeah.
Oh, well, there's the classic Pathfinder, isn't there? That's a response to people not liking the way D&D was going.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then they turned that into a space system with Starfinder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But V, what's a good system that you like to plug into other systems that works really well for you?
Oh, that I like to plug into it. I mean, I mix and match a lot. I think I don't inherently think of them as good and bad. It's like picking up Lego pieces, and sometimes you pick up a really funky one, and that actually makes you want to put it into other things because it's so weird. How would it fit with these other things? And what interesting things come out of that? I think one thing that I do think we should all think about is sort of like the safety systems around your games. That's always a good thing to consider. There's an online resource called the TTRPG Safety Toolkit that's curated by Kiana Shaw and Lauren Bryan Monk that puts together all these safety tools. So if your game doesn't have if you haven't explicitly considered a safety tool mechanic kind of system in thinking in your game, that's also a good thing to look into. That's always fits in every game. Yeah. But yeah, no, I like thinking of weird mechanics to see how they fit.
Yeah. And I'd say too, those safety mechanics are so valuable in a normal game, but 10 times more valuable in a con game.
Yes.
When you're just meeting people for the first time and maybe going to do something really intense together.
Yeah, and sometimes they're great because there's some established things that people can do across all games, like they're sort of universal in that way. But if you are game designing yourself, you get this extra opportunity to sort of bake it into the game to see exactly, because you know best as the game designer what pitfalls there might be. And so you can kind of curate those tools a bit tighter to your own experience. And that's always worth considering.
Yeah. And Nathan, can you think of a good example of something that's a system that you've plugged in well into another game?
So I think like every designer, your games end up looking more like a Frankenstein's monster than the original rules as written. But there are certainly games and systems that are really nice to draw on, whether it's written explicitly in your rules or if you're playing another game. Things like the approach to investigation that the gumshoe rules use, so that to avoid the roadblocks that would traditionally happen in investigative games. So gumshoe, if you investigate, if you're looking for clues, you can't fail. If you've got an appropriate skill or you look in the right place, you can't fail. There's none of that. I roll to search for the clue that's obviously there and I fail, and now we're going to wander around. I'm going to make the same check 6 more times, or the game master has to find some new way to move our story along and that sort of thing. So Gumshoe and the philosophy behind that sort of way to play your game and your investigation games, that sort of thing, is something that I'll use quite often. You know, that the idea that let's not roll, or let's not have a system for something that's going to bottleneck the game or slow the game up. You know, let's just focus on the bits that are interesting, roll for the bits that are interesting, and leave the rest to our common sense and moving our story forward.
Yeah, yeah. I also remember from a fair while ago, Nathan, you talking about using the aspects from Fate as something to stimulate personality on systems that didn't have that.
Yeah, so I think I might have written some stuff about, and not just Fate, but also Fiasco and that approach as well. So it's just a matter of asking questions of the players, and there's lots of variations. The 20 questions, you can play classic drama and improvisation games and that sort of thing, and ask players their game, questions about their characters, and one thing that I really like to do is ask questions about the world, particularly when we're starting a game, that session 0 prep or our early on the game. Ask players about what do their characters know is true, and that may become fact, or it might become just rumor and misunderstanding and that sort of thing. So I'm a drama teacher by day, so improvisation and play building and that sort of thing is sort of something that I draw on a fair bit.
Imagine there'd be so many crossover skills with drama.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
Excellent. And so, Jack, how do you go about building a system that helps your players feel heroic?
So when I sort of make systems, I try and take an approach of like every action that people do, like that's worth sort of mentioning at the table, is like really big and world changing, whether you succeed or fail. So I was making a role-playing game system called Numer Venom, where you're all like superpowered sci-fi people in a fantasy world. And so I just say, like, as Nathan V was saying before, like you can just succeed on most things. But if you're doing something that's like dangerous, or takes a very short amount of time, or could potentially hurt someone, that's when you roll. And what I like doing is making the consequences for failure not just like you miss, but it's like because you're so powerful, you can, like, if you miss, you'll like blast a wall out or something, and that could reveal a new area. Or like if you're on a ship, like the mast falls over and it starts to keel and things like that. So yeah, like I and just having the successful events be or successful results being equally large in magnitude, if that makes sense.
It does, it does. I'm thinking of that scene in The Highlander where the Kurgan's being fought by the Egyptian and they're destroying the tower around them with every miss.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a cool way to do it. And just from the start, like your level 1 ability is like smash through a wall.
Yeah,
is what I like doing. Yeah.
Excellent. So V, in the last few years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your design skills, in particular with regards to game systems?
It's interesting because we sort of hinted at this with Nathan. I think that it's the understanding that like game design for RPGs specifically is a very multidisciplinary area. It's not that well established, and we can beg, borrow, and steal from every other discipline on existence on this planet to kind of like learn more about it. So for me, it was really helpful to understand, okay, what part of game design, because game design is big, am I struggling with? If it's something like plot, pacing, characters, maybe you can look at advice that's like traditionally aimed at authors or playwrights or drama students, and kind of like mine that as a well of knowledge. And if it's something that's, dice probabilities or crunchy rules are where you're stuck at. Looking at board games, there's a lot of good video games now that kind of cross over that, like board game, video game, like Slay the Spire, Dicey Friends, I think it's called. Gloomhaven's got an online implementation as well. So like all of these disciplines are blurring into one another. So I think for me, that's been, in terms of trying to get the skill set, is trying to target what am I weak at, and kind of looking further than game design even, into other fields for inspiration and guidance. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And then Nathan, I have to ask, does designing a system have to take years and years of work?
No, I was going to say yes, because it feels like it.
It feels like it.
But no, and I think that that's a stumbling block that lots of new designers, find, because you look at established games, you look at a game that requires 3 core rule books to play, or a book that's 300 pages long, and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it doesn't take years to design a system or create a game. I cut my teeth on game design on 24-hour game design challenges and things, much akin to game jams and things today. And that idea of rapid iteration and just stream of consciousness and getting your ideas on paper and beg, borrowing and stealing from wherever you can, as we've already talked about using the resources that are already out there. Constraint is a really great creative tool sometimes. The more constraint can make you more creative than being told, design whatever you want and you've got as much time as you like. And that was part of why I started National Game Design Month as well, because lots of people, were talking. And so I started that in 2010, but, this starts way back in the days of the Forge and then Gen Con Oz and things like that. So we're talking early and mid 2000s, 2005, 8, 10. Lots of people talk about, I'm writing a game. I've been working on it for 5 years, that sort of thing. And I think too often people forget that perfect is the enemy of finished. And so this idea of, and it's a total riff off National Novel Writing Month. It's, sit your butt down, write something, share it with the world, talk about it, play it, warts and all. You've now finished a game. Congratulations. And if you want to take it further, that's when you go and you play test, you polish it, you refine it, but you've done something, you've finished it, you've got the core to build on and move further forward with it. So no, it doesn't take years.
Yeah, a lot of the really big game systems have been out for like 30 years or something as well, and had players playing it and giving the feedback. So the sooner
exactly,
the sooner you hear back from really the person whose opinion that matters most, which is the player and the GMs and stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you get someone who isn't you to run this game successfully?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that leads us on nicely. So Nathan, how do you get people started designing a system for a role-playing game?
Well, I think that for most people, it starts with a really cool idea. Something that either they haven't seen somebody else do, or they've seen it done in a way that they want to do it differently. That's usually where I start. I go, that's a cool idea, but once again, it's 400-page rule book and I can't be bothered reading that. So that's usually where I start. I personally fall back on a few questions I ask myself about what's the player experience I want to have, and how do I best achieve that. That falls back on the old big 3 questions that used to be asked and talked about a fair bit about. What's your game about? How does your game do it? And what rewards that player behavior, or what makes it fun? And so those sort of questions are a good starting point. If I want to create a game about X, then what are my players going to do in that setting or that style of game? And how do I reinforce or reward that behavior to achieve that? And that's kind of where I sort of start with my design process anyway, after I've got the cool idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Really cool. I'll start using that. That sounds good.
Yeah.
What was that you, Jack? How do you get started when you start designing a system for a role-playing game?
Oh, man. Yeah. I think it's the similar process, really, of just being like, wanting to do something in a different game that I can't quite do, and then thinking, well, how could I design something that will allow me to do that? And then it just sort of builds from there. It sort of like calcifies on that core idea, is how I've done it in the past.
Yep. So what takes you from the dissatisfaction through to committing a rule to your keyboard?
just like pulling out my phone and writing something down.
Yeah. So no editing to start with.
The trip home is the enemy of productivity, I think. Yeah, but sort of just yeah, like exactly as Nathan's saying, like to get the cool idea and then sort of, I'm the kind of person where like I couldn't not design games, if you know what I mean. It's like a compulsion. So, yeah, but just thinking about, the experience that you want people to have and what you want to be easy for them, and then just finding ways to make it easy and then showing people kind of enthusiastically and talking their ear off about it and seeing if they think it's cool.
And what about you, V? How do you get started designing a system for a role-playing game?
This is, I mean, I've done that idea of mechanics first and then make a game out of a mechanic, but most of the time for the bigger projects, I think I start with what I want the game experience to be, the heart of the game, like the theme, like what a player is going to care about in this story, and kind of build up that sort of emotional core of the game. Because a lot of the games that I write have some sort of strong emotional core to it. So I start there with the emotions. And then once I work out what the heck this game is meant to be about, then I start looking for systems to plug into that might get it going in the direction I want it to go. Oftentimes it won't.
Do you have a standard set that you kind of use?
Sorry?
Do you have sort of like a standard set that you start with, or
of mechanics?
Yeah, for sort of designing more emotionally focused games. Because that's something that I struggle with, is like how do
right. I did a panel for Metatopia recently about specifically emotional storytelling and mechanics. So can check that one out. But in a nutshell, there's a few different things that you use, like getting buy-in on the player level, having sort of strong fictional levers that are baked into characters to help them have an emotional core or an emotional drive that drives the story.
And is that part of like the character kind of sheet process, or? It's
sort of, it can be, but it blends into what you want those characters to be doing throughout the story. So even if you've got like, when you're filling out, like D&D style, like sometimes the 5th edition has the I forget what it's called now. Some one-line thing about who you are and what you might want. That's good to help you start out a character, but if you build a system that continuously asks stuff of your characters, like I'm going to use my own game as an example. In Good Society, there's like a phase where you review what your characters has done up to that point and like make decisions about who they are as a person going forward.
Really cool.
It's like a reflective exercise. Like that helps build emotional investment from the player to the character, and then like that sort of thing.
Do they use those decisions you've made about their characters to solve problems, or?
So that gives because it's Good Society, a Jane Austen RPG, gives them reputation, which then influences the social circles and how they're perceived in society. And
oh, cool.
That sort of thing. So it makes sense in that world, not in all worlds, but in that particular world. It makes sense.
Again, it's a system that's very specific for a specific purpose.
Yes, exactly. So the letter writing phase probably does not work in a lot of other games.
That's fantastic.
I could see it in D&D.
Yeah. Everyone knows that player with the 10-page backstory. So Nathan, how do you know if your system is working? How do you work that out?
I think somebody said it. I think you might have said it earlier, John, when you can put it in a stranger's hands and get the desired outcome from them. But before that, so when you reach that blind playtesting phase and it works the same way as at your table, then you're probably on the right track. But before that, you can. I guess it depends on the individual. I find I can iterate at my desk and play through scenes myself in my head or with dice at my desk. It must drive my wife mad because she works in the same office that I do, and the clatter of dice, type, clatter. Yes. But you can reiterate in your head, or, you can use programs. You can, if you want some statistical analysis, you can play with guinea dice or programs like that. And before you get it to your playtesters.
Yeah, absolutely, Nathan. Sorry, we're starting to lose you a little bit there, I'm afraid,
so I
Nathan.
guess there's a number of steps for me.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay, man. These things happen. So V, how do you know when your systems are working? How do you know when you're getting the game you want to design out there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with playtesting. It's hugely important in our process. We often say test early, test often. But to be more specific about what I'm looking for when I'm analyzing playtest feedback, is I'm usually looking for like general trends and not individual instances of things. And then I'm also looking for something that we gave a really stupid moniker, FUCS, which is like points of friction, unintuitive mechanics. So when people are like engaging in the mechanics in the wrong way, confusing, any moments of confusion in those playtest games. And then the S is like any points where the game is slowing down. That sometimes it's worth it, but a lot of times it isn't. Yeah. So those 4 things are the specific things I'm looking for when assessing.
Slowing down on purpose only.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Only when I've made the speed bump myself.
Yes, yes. And Jack, what about you? How do you know when the system's doing what it's supposed to do?
When it works.
Yeah. Simple as that.
Yeah. I think for me, like especially with role-playing games, I tend to try and design ones that work over in sort of a number of connected sessions. I mean, yeah, we all do. But yeah, it's sort of when the players are sort of like talking to me about the game when it's not night, if that makes sense. And just getting kind of curious about how it works and like asking about it and reminding me about it and things like that. So when people are finding it interesting and want to keep playing is sort of the feedback that I look for, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so V, what's the biggest challenge you've faced in game design?
The biggest challenge, I had a heck of a time thinking of this, but then it struck me like lightning, which was when I have a very specific idea of a game and it's either too big, too difficult, or like weirdly tricky in its own way, then it can be a really long time between when I decide I want to make this game and when I actually come up with a game system that does it justice. And when that period is really long, it's really challenging for me to not like lose hope, not to think like, oh, I'm just not good enough to make this game, and to sort of take that perspective of like, okay, well, it might not be now, but if I keep chipping away at it, at some point I'm going to crack the nut, or, you know, like make the scope of the game different or whatever it is. But to just keep taking that next step forward can be difficult.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Jack, what about you? What's the biggest challenge you faced in game design?
Sort of just like there tends to be a lot of like advice that's about like you need to do X before you move forward, or do this or do that or do that, and it can just be this ever increasing kind of staircase that never ends of like prerequisites for things that you should do before you start putting something out there, I guess, for a playtest or as a released kind of product and that kind of thing. So that's been sort of tricky for me to to avoid doing the sort of falling into the trap of trying to make things perfect before releasing them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I'm a Virgo, so I'm a perfectionist. So yeah, I try and avoid just like freaking out and thinking that everyone will hate something just because I haven't, spent 40 billion hours on it.
Yes.
Yeah, that idea of imposter syndrome, I think sometimes sort of, I haven't done it the way those other people have done it, and am I good enough? Is that sort of thing. I think that never goes away for any creative person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think there's I'm always worried about putting something out there that like has a typo or something, or like isn't quite clear and things like that. But if you're making any kind of like, especially role-playing game systems, which are tend to be quite dense and wordy, you're not going to get everything perfect first time around. And so I try and look at it like first edition of something is going to have some crunchy bits that we didn't quite spot, and that you can't spot until you have sort of like 100 or 1,000 random people playing the game out in the real world and then giving that feedback. So yeah, I think that could be something that people look at, I guess, is looking at a game as like, it's not just the first time you release it and that's it, and then you never do anything with it ever again. You can always update and work on it and keep going, even after you put it out in the world.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so, Nathan, what do you think is an important thing to watch out for when designing a system?
I think hanging on to, so in terms of things to be careful of, is hanging on to stuff that doesn't work just because you really like the idea or you really like the phrasing or you really like the description or whatever, the layout. I think that the saying in writing circles is you need to be prepared to kill your darlings. So you might really love that one mechanism for drinking in taverns in your game about car driving, I don't know. But if it doesn't fit, if it doesn't work, you've got to be willing to jettison that stuff so that you can focus and keep your game on track. I think sort of something to watch out for.
My strategy is always to build just like 10 games at the same time and just
that's it.
Like
You
a
can
Hunger
use
Games thing, like the ones that don't quite work, I'm like, no, you're out. And then I'll take that and stick it in the next game and be like, nice, all right.
Yeah.
Jack's Darwin system of game design.
Yeah, Darwinian game design, yeah. Maybe you could use the car mechanics as Viking ship mechanics and then the drinking.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you add in some other random thing from 4 games ago.
Yeah. And so, V, what's an important thing you watch out for when designing a system?
I mean, I agree with a lot of the discourse about not getting too far down a rabbit hole, and that you kind of stop making progress, and that's really important. I think that scoping out your projects is sometimes helpful in that way. Like sometimes you get too ambitious, and maybe the solution is to pare it down, pare what your vision of it is, to something that you will be able to finish, and then in the future you can definitely take that and expand upon it, and release a new edition or whatever it is, the way that you're doing it. So yeah, I mean, you will learn so much more from one finished project, no matter how small or how completely disastrous it is, than you will just from like an unfinished idea.
Yeah, and because like learning the whole process from start to finish, beyond the game design part, like
exactly
how you design future games and like what you think is important during the design.
Yeah, because I find writing rule books a part of game design, because that's how people are going to learn your system. So it's not just about the balancing of the system, it's about how quickly it is to you're able to teach that or learn that or express the ideas.
Crazy how like the design part is like a third of the whole process of actually.
It is. I have a couple of zines here to show everyone. Zines are a great way to start if you're just putting something together. There's a lot of great ones out there.
The first game I ever
Have you seen these ones?
Well, hang on, Jack.
Sorry.
Yeah. All good.
Yeah.
So I was just getting excited because the first game I ever made was a zine, actually. Yeah.
There you go.
Is this the same thing as Americans call them ash cans, don't they? Is that the same idea?
I think it's
similar.
It depends.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's a different idea.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Oh, I was just going to say that, my understanding is an ash can is kind of like as edition 0. So it's your first iteration, and not necessarily first iteration, but it's, you've play tested, it works for you, and you put it out, and it's an opportunity for other people to get their hands on it and experience that, but it may not be the finished, polished version of your final game. So yeah.
Be brave and get it out there. Yeah, excellent. Well, I think we should probably answer some some of our listener questions. Let's start with Peter Blake asks, when I'm thinking about using a subsystem from one game and another, are there any early warning signs I can look for to tell me that the combination isn't going to work? Who wants to take that one?
I think if you're having a bad time. you know, when you start trying it out, if you're just like, oh, this isn't really going very well, like if people aren't having fun, or yeah, like sort of these Puck's idea, I guess, you know, if it's sort of just really confusing or slowing down and things like that, like that's an awesome acronym. I think it'll be really handy to use. Yeah. I'm gonna start using it if that's okay.
Yeah, do it.
That's cool.
The Storybrewer system TM. Maurice asks, the board game I'm designing is primarily targeted at kids aged 9 to 14. I have considered writing supplementary rules that would make my game playable by adults. What are your thoughts on doing that for the initial release versus doing it after the initial release? The former means a lot more work, more rules, more testing, as well as altering the initial pitch. Nathan, what do you think about this?
Well, so I haven't written or designed many board games, but I like to play them. My gut feeling is to maybe, so I would decide what my game is about and who my target audience is and focus on that. And if there's an opportunity to expand it, you know, I think that it depends on how easily that will be. If I was going with this approach, I would probably still focus on my original target audience, but be playtesting the other options and other rules so that it's not a matter of releasing a finished game and then trying to work out how to shoehorn a supplement or additional rules in later. Unless it's a relatively simple adjustment to add an appendix or an optional rules or that sort of thing. I don't know if Jack, you've got anything.
Yeah, having something out there and then seeing if the demand is there as well. But if you're doing a Kickstarter, then absolutely write it and have it as like a stretch goal or add-on or something. You know, yeah, just see if the demand is there and then do it is what I would say. I think.
Yeah. There's nothing stopping you from doing it as a whole separate standalone product as well if it gets to that level of difference. So you do one, and then it's like, you know, like code names regular, code names duet, code names blah, like do one of those series.
And we have another question now from David Nolan. There appears to be a trend in board games, at least, where they're using apps to enhance the experience. Do you see mobile apps or other technology changing the way other game systems are designed?
Yeah, I think so. One of our games has a timer mechanic, and that uses, like, you know, you get your phone out to time things. But I think that that's likely to happen.
How did you go about building the timer into it, V?
We didn't actually build it in. We just assume everyone has a timer on them.
Oh, right. I see. Yes.
They have, you know, any phone has it nowadays. But I think that there is like, there is one role-playing game that just came out or is in development called Alice is Missing that uses
text messaging.
Yeah. And then there's like a Discord games that are LARPs and stuff that exist online platforms. So I think that there is a lot of experimental things out there that are already breaching into some of those, especially this year because a lot of online play has been happening. So yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of crossover with video games and analog games as well. So yeah.
And that's a key thing too, isn't it? It's to say that you don't necessarily have to go away and spend thousands of dollars on getting an app designed when most people do have a smartphone and computers and access to all sorts of stuff. Let's see. So I'll put this question at Jack, where Brian asks, do you generally prefer leveled systems or ones more based on skill advancement?
I definitely prefer skill advancement ones because I grew up playing like what was it, Morrowind and games like that, and so yeah, I just think it's fun. I think the more you use something, the more it can like kind of guide the kind of game that you're wanting to play. Because if you have levels, you sort of have to pick so what you want next and what you think you're going to want to do. But if you have a skill-based advancement system, then like players will naturally sort of their characters will start to match what they actually want to be playing, if that makes sense. In D&D, I've chosen like 1 million feats for various characters and stuff that I just never end up using. So I'm like, that sounds cool. And then, you know, it's not how I actually want to play. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's take that a little bit further too, because some of these games, some of these more specific to a particular task types of games, can be quite light on character progression. Like V, you've had to build a little bit of character progression by using Power for the Apocalypse into Alas for the Awful Sea. How did you go about that?
So the advancement system in that is based on, because Alas for the Awful Sea is sort of a game about sad sea tales. And so this, you know, inspired by this idea of like, you know, you're like leaning over the table, it's dark and cold outside, and you're like, well, let me tell you what happened to me. Then that's like how you advance. Like when you finish an arc of the story that you constitutes a tale for you, then you just level up and take advancements in that. So that's how we built it into that system. Yeah.
And Nathan, Fu was sort of, there was some advancement in it, but a freeform universal, I should say, which abbreviates very nicely to Fu. So, you know,
yeah. It's Fu, it's not FU, as many people read it, but yeah.
So how'd you go about thinking about advancement in the universal system?
So the original rules didn't. It had some suggestions about what you might do, and because it's very tight, it's designed to get you playing in minutes. You describe your character with 4 adjectives basically, and move on and play your game. And so the advancement suggestions in that original document were simply about changing your character, not improving your character. So change the words that you use to describe your character to reflect what's happened to them in the stories that you've been telling. Since then, I've played around with other ideas, but it was certainly something that some players gave a lot of feedback strongly about their desire to see their characters improve over time, not just change. And so there's been lots of suggestions. It's been out for 10 years now, and so there's lots of alternate systems and suggestions and things. But ultimately, it's about building competence in that particular game. So now you simply add more words to describe your character based on their experiences and things like that. And it's more a milestone system, like a lot of role-playing games use now. Reach a certain point in your story, achieve your drives or your goals, improve your character or change your character in some way.
Yeah. I think we'll make this our last user question for tonight. And Trent asks, I think we'll start with you with this one, Jack. Do you feel that failing forward needs to be part of the system?
I just think that it can be more fun if you fail forward. So yeah, just like the idea of like in an RPG, if you fail a roll, your arrow actually hits like a rope with a chandelier and everything catches on fire. It's kind of fun. And because it just makes it kind of exciting to fail as well, if that makes sense. And in board games, sort of, it's not fun, like, because it's a bit of an allegory for it. Like, it's not fun to be eliminated from play, kind of, or to have your turn just end up with you being unable to do anything. So yeah, like in role-playing games, I'd say, like, if possible, try and make it so that failure is exciting and moves things forward. Definitely.
Yeah, we've got the various Trail of Cthulhu and Gumshoe type stuff was very useful at defining ways of failing forward and leaving that kind of thing out. Nathan, V, can you think of a good example of other systems that are good at failing forward?
PBTA systems usually have a good fail forward in that middle range of outcomes. But I would also say, like, I think it's more so than fail forwards. I think it's where the tension is in your game and what continues to sustain it. And failing forward is one example of that, but it's not the only example of that. And so I think that's where it's like rolling and then having a fail forward state is a very, very, as Jack was saying, like flexible system that probably catches a lot of it. A lot of the different, it probably works in a lot of different games that you'd want to make, but there's probably other ways to do that. And so I think for me, it's like thinking more about, well, continued sources of drama or tension is there in the game.
Okay. Well, I think we better start wrapping up there. So I've got some very important last questions to ask our guests. V, I have to ask you, 3d6 or 1d20?
I get a 1d100.
Yes, of course you can. You can order off menu.
Then I would like a 1d100 that is the size of a beanbag chair. I would love to roll one of those.
Stand
A
back.
hamster ball of a 1d100. Just run in it, and whatever you stop on is your roll.
A gigantic golf ball. Nathan, for you, is it cards or tokens?
Oh, it's. I was going to say cards. Cards. I think so. Yes, I like the tactile feel, and I find it difficult to pick tokens up off a table.
Easy. And Jack, at the end, would you go dice or diceless?
I like dice because it's fun hearing him clatter around and the drama and tension of being like, what are we going to get? Yeah, it's fun. It depends what experience you're trying to create. I think.
Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all we have time for tonight. Let me thank our wonderful panelists, Jack, V, and Nathan. Jack, how can people find out more about you and Half Monster Games?
We are Half Monster Games on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and also just through our website. Subscribing to the newsletter is really good at halfmonstergames.com.
Brilliant. And V, how can people find out more about you and Storybrewers role-playing?
Yeah, come check us out on our website for Storybrewers is probably a good place to start. And then we have a Twitter and a Facebook as well if you'd like to follow us there. Twitter is probably better than the Facebook. we don't post as much on the Facebook.
Twitter it is. And Nathan, how can people find out more about you and Peril Planet?
The website Peril Planet is the go-to. It'll have all the other links. I would follow us on Facebook, not Twitter, because I'm terrible at Twitter. So yeah, join the newsletter. I give free stuff away as often as I can create it. So yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, and I'd also like to thank Andrew Smith for working behind the scenes to make this event happen, and Reid for her help with the Go Play website and copywriting. And last of all, I'd like to thank you all for sharing your time with us tonight. If you've had fun tonight and would like to see more events like this one, let us know on Facebook at Go Play Brisbane, or leave us a message at goplaybrisbane.com.au and sign up for our mailing list while you're there. So I'm John Reid. I hope to game with you all again soon. Until next time, game on.